Hey folks, I'm just going live. Um, this is Paul Quigley of NewsWhip, and I'm being joined by Aubrey Quinn of the Clyde Group. Aubrey, welcome to the NewsWhip Pulse.
Hi, thanks for having me, Paul.
So we're really excited to have Aubrey on because Clyde Group's a PR agency that's had a really remarkable 2020, both in terms of the values and how the company and the agency has been doing so well, but also in terms of their use of data and their tactical ways of really pulling ahead this year. So we're looking forward to getting stuck in. As always on the Pulse, our focus is on the information landscape and the professionals in media and in communications who are navigating it today, and on seeing what the best practices and what very successful agencies and people are doing in the media sphere today. And today with Aubrey, we're going to be looking out at topics like standing out as a PR firm in today's environment, using data and insight to win new business, measuring crises and issues and how you do that in the current information landscape, and measuring impact as well, and how to plan effectively. And as always, we aim for speed to insight on the NewsWhip Pulse. We're only here for 30 minutes, and we'll have a few minutes at the end of the Pulse for questions. Danielle will have just dropped a notification into the chat channel, so please drop any questions that you have there. And now, without further ado, I want to hand over to our guest and ask Aubrey, you're very welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about the Clyde Group and why you've had such a remarkable year in 2020?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And it really is a special thing to be talking about having a remarkable year in 2020, because in March and April, I think Clyde Group, like many other communications agencies and organizations, was nervous about what the year was going to look like and what it was going to bring. And so it's nice to be here in December and have the perspective that our commitment to our values and our mission really paid off this year, especially as we doubled down on client service. So for those who don't know, Clyde Group is a DC-based public relations and a public affairs agency. Our work is focused primarily on corporate communications, public affairs, nonprofit, and issue advocacy. And because we're all a little bit of masochist, crisis communications. We're a newer firm, we're just 5 years old. And so we've had to think a lot about differentiation as a new firm in a crowded space, because we're ambitious and we want to compete with major players. So we've differentiated ourselves around recommendations driven by data and insights. We've also positioned ourselves as both true strategic advisors as well as boots on the ground tactical executioners. You can get both when you work with Clyde Group. And finally, we are hyper focused on client service and being true partners to all of our clients. And like I said, I truly believe it's those three elements that contributed to Clyde Group's success this year.
And if we look at the recognition that you received this year as an innovator with Provoke, the PR News 100 Agency Elite, PR News Top Places to Work, and can you tell us a little bit more about why all those recognitions have been coming your way?
Yeah, the recognition really has been a bright spot in what has otherwise been a very challenging year. So we're very proud of it. It's proud and exciting to celebrate those things along the way. These are cool milestones. Our founder wanted to build a firm that was truly the best agency to work for, the best agency to work with. That's been our vision from the beginning and remains our vision today. We don't do anything without thinking about what that means for our employees, but also how it will benefit all of our client partners. You and I were talking about this a little earlier this week, Paul, but I've been surprised that we're able to differentiate ourselves on being nice. We are a genuinely nice group of people. We talk about it with potential clients that when you're in the communications trenches, you want to like the people and trust the people that you're there with. And I think that's really, really true with Clyde Group. But also we've made some early and big investments in data products and services, and they just allow us to be more strategic.
Let's drill in on that, because that's very linked with why you've been recognized as an innovator and feels like a real engine underneath the business. Can you tell us a bit about how you think about data and tools and why you think Clyde Group is doing that a bit differently?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, everyone on this call knows that the industry is changing so quickly. We communicate so differently than we did even 2 decades ago when I started my career. I am obsessed with data and metrics, and part of that might be because I come from the era of literally having to manually track and cut clips in newspapers and dub TV clips onto VHS tapes. So my business partner knows that I would be much happier in a dark corner with raw data tables or a spreadsheet than almost anywhere else. And I truly think it's because there's so much information at our fingertips, and I just simply did not have access to it when I started my career. So much of communications, at least I feel like, is putting together a puzzle, right? We have all these different challenges, or how are we going to reach a new audience? How do we communicate this new product? And data gives us access to more pieces of the puzzle. It lets us see the big picture faster. And I am all about getting to the answers and solving the puzzles quicker and faster if we can.
And this, what's like, as I suppose a company that's focused on providing these kinds of insights and this kind of data, we find it's so invigorating when people put it to use, and also frustrating when people don't. What do you think is the difference, and why do you think Clyde Group and you personally have the aptitude or disposition to put data to work in your pitches and your crisis management across your work?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think part of it is that I didn't have it for so long, and I know what it's like even to try to create clipping reports for clients using Google. And it's nice that it's there, but it takes longer. It's not as thorough. It's not as complete and comprehensive. I'd rather have the information. And because Clyde Group is so new, we've built this into our foundation. It's almost like a part of our culture. We rely on this data early when we're talking to prospective clients, when we're delivering things to clients. You know, one thing that I think a lot of communicators enjoy about their career and their chosen profession is that no two, but there are some consistencies across the days. And one of them at Clyde Group, at least, is the use of data. And it's looking at information available to us through products like NewsWhip Spike, shameless plug for you, Paul. But that was one of the first products that Clyde Group brought on. And we don't go into any new business conversation without first looking at the data available across NewsWhip Spike and the other suite of services that we use. And we share those insights with our clients, and we also use it to form our strategic recommendations. And I can't imagine going into new business conversations blind. I think it always really impresses new clients that we go to that level of research, that we've analyzed what people are saying about them, what their reactions are, what engagement looks like on social. Clyde Group actually has a really interesting relationship with Ipsos, which is one of the big global research powerhouses. And we often field proprietary research for prospective clients and clients. And I think that immediately sets the tone that Clyde Group takes their work and their industry as seriously as they do.
And have you seen on the client side, like it's very interesting, and it shows if you're a firm that's willing to really engage with data and real insights about the market instead of vanity metrics, and if clients on the other side of the table, if that's what they want to see, that's going to explain quite a lot of the success that you've had and why you've taken that strategy. Do you think there's been a change client side? There's more attention being paid to, is this agency going to give me some vanity metrics supporting back, or are they engaged with reality? Has there been a change?
Yeah, I mean, I think it still depends on the organization. But I think it's critical that communicators have a seat at the table as organizations are making decisions. But increasingly, the table is where we're talking about results and outcomes, and that's measured by data. We get that for sales, we get it for marketing, and for too long, PR has had to use really woolly metrics like impressions or ad value equivalency. And with the acceleration of digital marketing and adopting that into communication strategies, we now often have instantaneous results and insights. And if other departments, units are bringing that to the table, I think there is an expectation and a demand on public relations and communicators to do the same. I love insights because it's such a broad term. It means so many things. So research ahead of time lets us understand opinions. It lets us test the effectiveness of messaging. Internal communications can be measured now by video views, social engagement, town hall participation. And so I think it's really important that we as communicators look at what problem are we trying to solve? Like, what is the outcome? And then what are all those measurable KPIs we can build in along the way? Because it makes us seem like we are taking our work as seriously as other departments. And now there are more opportunities to share insights. And I don't think we have to use such nebulous metrics anymore.
Yeah. They're very big numbers, so they're hard things for people to turn away from. But certainly the.
Well, I mean, how many times, Paul, in my career have I pulled together like unique monthly visitor metrics or impressions, and the numbers are in the billions on an earned media story because Yahoo ran it. And we know that billions of people did not read this one article on Yahoo. And I think we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard.
Yeah, I was recently on the judging panel of some PR industry awards, and I think about 80% of the entries would have used impressions as this, and always in the hundreds of millions, often in the billions. And then when I Google the event, the thing that is being talked about, and I get a Business Wire top link, a PR press release distribution, Yahoo Finance picks it up because a robot published it, and then okay, something else sometimes, but then you question where those billions came from.
Yes, that is exactly right. And I think when we do that, when we of communicators do that, and we sit down with the marketing experts, right, who have real tangible metrics, and we come in with our fluffy hundreds of millions, 2 billion impressions, we damage our own credibility. We are better than that. And there are so many tools and resources at our disposal to talk about actual impact. And that's what's really exciting about our profession, is we can make actual impact. So I never want to damage our credibility by using fluff, using woolly numbers.
And there's no doubt that like communications might be entering into an era where it's going to be so critical, because reputations that we used to be able to build through broadcast channels now have to be maintained in a world where the public are talking back, and the public are very critical, and things can come from anywhere. So there's a huge transition, I think, of power coming, but it's very hard to measure how perception is of the brand that you're defending today, and to bring those back to metrics. I was heartened by seeing some actuals in there, like, it can be hard to pull actuals when you're in the earned space, but increasing the use at least of number of videos viewed, which can be a hard metric, say for something uploaded to Facebook, or number of engagements, things like that. But let's come back to my little theory there. Do you think we are entering that golden era in communications, where a more complex media ecosystem means more demand for the kinds of skills that communicators have?
Yes. I mean, listen, the world is changing so quickly, so rapidly. I was thinking about, Facebook. We couldn't even get on it, access it without an EDU account until 2006, and it didn't really pick up popularity-wise until a decade ago. And now you look at the impact it has. Twitter didn't exist until 2006 and really didn't engage and connect until 2009. Instagram is later. TikTok has changed the way we communicate, how children are communicating, newer, younger generations, and how brands are interacting with them. And I think what is essential for communicators to evolve as the world continues to evolve is to expand how we think about what we do. I sit down in too many conversations when people hear PR, hear public relations, and make that immediate jump to media relations. That's how it works. Where the world, the ecosystem of communications is massive, and if we let it, it can touch so many things. I mean, you mentioned video, and I think it's increasingly important to think about how we are using video both internally with our own internal communications, as well as externally, whether that's on social media or through sponsored content, or if we place an earned media story through broadcast, how we push that out and how we amplify it. And as we have more digital facing tools, and it's not just media relations, we have to build in the metric component. And if we are looking ahead of time and setting goals that are hard metrics and measurable metrics, and know that's a part of the program, it helps when you are, it helps for judges, right? For the PR awards, who can look and see actual results. More importantly, if you're internal, you can present to board of directors, you can present to C-suite on the results of actual campaigns, and you can do it through change in sentiment. You can do it through video views. You can do it through pre and post surveys. I mean, there are so many tools. It's not just click-through rate. It's not just impressions. And being thoughtful about how we incorporate data, I believe, truly believe, it just makes us a stronger communicator.
Yeah, I as an aside, I was once were used a fair bit in UK government agencies, and there was one campaign where they were getting people to replace the batteries in smoke detectors, and the means of assessing success was sales of 9-volt batteries, little square ones, because they're mainly, it's one of the most common uses, and they reckon if they could achieve a sales bump in those, they could take a pretty accurate guess that a lot of that would be attributed to smoke detector change your battery campaign.
I love that. I love that. And I think it's so important to think creatively about what does actual success look like, especially if you're asking people to take an action, right? And so if you can, at the end, track, like, we were able to shift behaviors, that's really powerful stuff, right? Like, it's a really, really cool industry to be in. I get so excited. I'm too excited. I get so excited to have that sort of ability. And I hope that everyone sees it's bigger than clicks, impressions. I mean, it's buying 9-volt batteries.
Yeah. And I mean, it's being creative about how you measure. And that brings me to, the something that you've created as well at Clyde. And I think getting into the measurement business, you're always approximating, trying to find the most accurate way of measuring impact. And you've created something that seems to me like it has a lot of the composite ingredients that you'd really care about, called the power score. So can you tell us a little bit about impact and the power score, and how you use that for earned media?
Yes. Now, Paul, it's really important that my children not be listening, because I love all three of them dearly, but the power score might be my favorite thing I've ever given birth to. It is true labor of love. And it was developed from my own frustration with earned media. So as I was saying, when I started my career a lifetime ago, like other interns and assistant account executives, I was responsible for media monitoring. I was literally cutting clips, measuring inches, putting together clip books, using fax machines. And even now, 20 years later, we are offering incredibly vague metrics like impressions and unique monthly views, which, as we've talked about, aren't really substantial. And it certainly doesn't get to, was this a good story? So did that Yahoo placement, was it a good story? Was it the right story? So for Clyde Group's media relations clients, yes, we still share traditional metrics like hard number of earned media placements. X placements this year is X% more than last year. But we've also created our proprietary system called the Power Score. And POWER is an acronym for 5 elements of a successful story, and it's weighted on a scale of 1 to 10. And so if a story reaches a 9 or a 10 out of 10, we know it was a great story. We know it was a great story because we're measuring pull-through of messaging. We're measuring it where it was placed. Was it a priority outlet for that client? Was an expert quoted where our messages hit? And this is out of a score of 10. And like I said, if it's a 9 or a 10, it was a great story. It was the right story. And so then we'll often recommend to clients to put paid digital amplification behind it to make sure even more viewers see it. So then we're laying on, here was a hit, here was its power score. And now we also have digital metrics like click-through rates, and other things provided, whether we promote it over LinkedIn or Twitter, or even through like an Outbrain campaign. My favorite part of it is that we look at each of the elements, POWER, individually. And so we can see across the board from a diagnostic perspective, if we're having a problem with our subject matter experts being quoted, or if our messaging isn't landing. And so then we can refine our stories. So for Clyde Group, for our media relations accounts, we'll have a set hit target. We want to get X number of stories or this percentage increase from last year. But we also set really ambitious power score goals because quality matters just as much as quantity. And if we got a clip in the New York Times, but we were, the last client or organization mentioned in the bottom of that story, and there was no quotes and no message pull through, and it was just a mention, impressions give you full credit. And the power score lets us know we need to do something differently. Great if we're in the New York Times, but our quotes have to be stronger, our message has to be stronger, the person delivering the message has to be better. So the next time the power score goes up.
That's like, it sounds like the future of how we measure. It's really compelling, and like there's a lot of ingredients. Like just to drill into a couple of ingredients, and parents generally don't mind talking about their children a little bit. I hope we can drill in. Like you said, it's the right outlet. Do you think the right outlet then depends on the audience? It isn't, we got this in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, so everyone should be happy. Instead, sometimes, and this is something we find interesting, because often we see when people are using NewsWhip, they discover influential outlets with audiences they didn't know about, and they have ammunition to say you should care more about ZDNet or something rather than the New York Times with this audience. So your power score is dependent on the audience that you want to reach, is it?
Absolutely, and the client that we're working with. So we have two very different financial institutions that we work with. One is military facing, and so outlets that often aren't on organizations' top tier lists, like Military Times, military.com, is a top tier outlet for them. And so if we get a placement there, we measure that differently than if we get something in the Wall Street Journal. They aren't as concerned about those high-end economic reports because it doesn't really face their audience, right? Like who their main day-to-day consumers are. Another financial outlet we work with is heavily invested in the student loan space. They're targeting a much younger audience, right? And they're having a lot different conversations. And so something like a BuzzFeed might be, or a Scary Mommy, even when they're looking at parenting, is much more important when you're talking about preparing and saving for college and higher education. So we have completely different priority outlet lists for two very different financial institutions that we work with. And I think that's really important when you're setting metrics or starting campaigns for clients, is understanding who are we trying to reach, what behaviors are we trying to influence, and those key stakeholders and target audiences are usually very different. The power score accounts for that for sure.
That's great. So it's always subjective to the goals and what we're trying to do, not some objective, hey, we got into the Hall of Fame publisher, but much more linked to we achieved objectives here and we changed perceptions.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be when I started my career that the end goal was Oprah, and I think we can all agree that if she was still on air, she would be a 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10 times. But since she is not, I don't know that we have one outlet that is consistent across all of our clients in terms of top tier, just because our clients are so different.
Yeah. Well, coming back up to the, I suppose the information landscape where we're operating in these days, it's transformed in the last decade. You've really paid attention to performance and metrics. Do you think there's any other big trends when we look at the macro changes in news economics that people in communications really need to pay attention to?
Yes, and I fear that this is where our conversation takes a dark turn, so I apologize in advance. I mean, honestly, the one thing that I'm watching the closest and I continue to worry about and wonder how we're going to address it as communicators is the attack on the credibility of the news and the continued mistrust on our journalists and our government watchdog. I mean, it's a very important part of certainly the American social experiment, and it makes me nervous to see the credibility of news sources and very strong and important institutions being challenged and threatened. And it's also been heartbreaking watching newsrooms close from an economic perspective. And this was pre-COVID, but it's been accelerated since COVID. But nearly 2,000 local newsrooms across the United States closing since 2004, which has created just these dramatic news deserts across the country. And the unfortunate outcome of that is that we have created and replaced these vacuums with echo chambers. And we surround ourselves with people either online, through our social channels, or our neighbors that we choose to build relationships with, who they think the same as us. They're sharing stories that reinforce our beliefs, our misconceptions, and I think it's leading us to a pretty dangerous place. So it's more important than ever, I feel, to support media, subscribe to your newspaper, right? Pay the subscription fee. And we have to not get lazy and greedy in how we're consuming the news.
Yeah, our common reality depends on it. And certainly to the extent communications happens through earned and happens through those channels, the integrity of those channels really matters, right? If everything collapses into Breitbart versus the Huffington Post, where can you speak authoritatively? What channels do you want to earn in then? You're just speaking maybe to one tribe or another, right?
Oh, Paul, it's so scary. It really is so scary. And I hope people are smart enough to see that it is happening and we can do something about it sooner than later.
Yeah.
Not unlike climate change. Let's acknowledge it. Let's fix it. Let's not put it off.
We're very, very into it. I think it's a really hard problem to describe because everyone's pointing at the other guy and calling them misinformation right now. So we need to find ways of standing back and saying, well, how do we, what's our way of knowing what's true here is, and how do we build trust when we have different values?
It's really scary to see it extend beyond news media, which, let's not pretend like there isn't a history there of sensationalism and yellow journalism. And that is part of the reality in our history. But now we are seeing that distrust extend into other important factual-based industries like medicine and science and research. And when we are questioning some of those things, especially in the midst of a global pandemic, I don't think it bodes brightly, unfortunately.
So it's on that gloomy note, we're running out of time. You have an opportunity to potentially pick up the mood, Aubrey, because I'm going to ask you about your predictions, if any, for the 2020s. And Danielle has come through with a couple of questions as well. And let's see if there may be time to get to at least one of those too. But tell me, is there any good news coming?
Well, the changes in recent history are happening at a breathtaking pace, so please don't call me in 10 years and hold me to any of these. The bad news is I do think we're going to see newsrooms to continue to close, which is going to force a more drastic shift to pay-to-play content and editorial. So just communicators, prepare for that, budget accordingly. I think what's going to be really interesting to watch is not just videos and podcasts, but the advancement of AR and VR as it becomes more mainstream. I keep encouraging my clients to look at esports and video games as a place to communicate, as a way to engage with a younger generation. That might be because I'm a mother of 2 teenage boys, but I'm watching the trend happen in real time and that entire industry grow. So I'd continue to look at more creative ways to communicate and those new platforms like AR, VR, esports. And, there's going to be a continued adoption of social. Kids are going to continue to migrate to new social platforms to get away from their parents. Their parents will follow them. The kids will migrate again. So heaven help us all as we stay in this cycle and need to download new apps.
I'm reading a history of news, it's called, I think, How We Came to Know Ourselves, a really interesting history of news, 1400s to the 1800s, and the concept of news. And, we had this stuff that the royalty paid top dollar for, like a lot of money. And then we had this free stuff that came up, and there was a lot of similar threats and interesting parallels. It's happening every 5 years now.
Yes, it's so fast.
So one question that Danielle put through from our audience is, can you use data, or does data matter when you're thinking about a crisis before it happens, or before crises happen? Can it play any role then?
Yes. So we are big believers in crisis playbooks, trying to anticipate what's going to happen, building up your brand reputation, loyalty before the crisis hits, knowing who you are before the crisis hits. I think we saw that really come into play this year. You could tell which brands knew who they were ahead of a pandemic, ahead of racial injustice protests and reactions. And so I think in terms of gathering that data, understanding brand perception, knowing where your clients, your customers want you to be is all really important broadly, but from a crisis perspective, you can really lean into that. And then I've been especially thrilled with, again, Paul, plug for you, the NewsWhip Spike tools, especially around crisis, because for too long we were relying on our gut instincts on whether we respond, don't respond, just monitor a story. And now, thanks to the tools that we have and the resources we're able to access, we can see how it's trending online. And even in periphery issue areas or competitors that you may have your eye on, watching how they respond to crisis lets you know and trains you how quickly you should engage, when you should engage. And this is information that we just didn't have before. It was more anecdotal, and now we have really good data to help drive those decisions.
That's great. Like, I think that's when we look at the little bit of change we're trying to drive, it is about just giving those foundations for decisions and helping people make those decisions with some footing and better understanding of what's going on outside underneath their feet. Aubrey, we're top of the hour, top of the half hour already. Thank you so much for joining us. Shout out to Denise for bringing us together.
Yes, thank you, Denise.
And we will, I will see you again soon, I hope. And I think with the NewsWhip Pulse, we're going to be back in January. We're going to have a very interesting early January session on the wonderful topic of misinformation. So please look out on social media channels, and we'll be telling you more about that. Aubrey, thank you so much.
Yes, happy holidays, Paul. Talk soon.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Bye.